kullansanız İngilizce.
Distinguished guests, our program is about to begin. We kindly request you to take your seats, please. Programımız başlamak üzeredir. Lütfen yerlerinizi alalım. Değerli konuklarımız, programımız başlamak üzeredir. Our program is about to begin. We kindly request you to take your seats, please. Sayın basın mensuplarımıza çok teşekkür ediyoruz. We thank distinguished members of the press. His Excellency Mr. Speaker of the Grand National Assembly of Türkiye, His Excellency President of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, heads of the visiting delegations, and distinguished guests. It's our great pleasure to have you here with us today at the opening ceremony of the Global Parliamentary Conference hosted by the Grand National Assembly of Türkiye and the Inter-Parliamentary Union. We would like to welcome you all. First, President of the IPU to the stage to deliver his speech. Mr. Pacheco, the floor is yours.
National Assembly of Turkey, our President, because he received us as well as he knows. We feel at home, Mr. Speaker. Thank you so much. Also, we know that nothing will fall from the sky, just water, sometimes. And so we need also to express that this conference involves a lot of work. To achieve success, the organization means a lot of work. A lot of work from the Secretariat of IPU, but allow me to say that from the staff of the Parliament of Turkey, the Grand National Assembly. To all of them also our special thanks. This conference is one excellent opportunity to take stock the roads we have traveled since 2018, the year where we saw the adoption of the two major global compacts governing migration. In December that year, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration and the Global Compact on Refugees. And we have this meeting about this important issue right now in Turkey. I believe that you all know, during the last year, we received the statistics showing that more than 80 million migrants happen and refugees happen in our world. More than 40% of that went to few countries, Colombia, Uganda, but special to Turkey, that received more than 9 million of migrants. And so, I need to say again, a special thanks to the Turkish authorities, because they did all the best to receive these migrants as persons. They did all the best to integrate the migrants in their society. Job creation programs, with access at health facilities, with access to programs to empower the skills of each one to get a job, because we are talking about human dignity. So, a country that received more than 9 million migrants did it. And allow me to say, without the support of the international community as it should be. And so, thank you so much to Turkey and to the President and to all the government of Turkey. We are talking about a very important issue: migration, refugees. And I will ask you, please, try to feel, each one of you, what is the feeling of someone that needs to leave everything behind? Home, family, friends, their own town, because of a war, because it will not find conditions to have a life, a job, because of climate change. Sometimes they lose everything, and it's impossible to continue in their home. You can feel, you may feel, if you put in the position of this human being, that no one will do it just because they like to do it. They are doing this because they need to do to survive. And if they need to do this to survive, we should do everything to receive them in conditions to have a new life. And if it is possible, to come back home in conditions to have a life there. And we don't need to have new rules. We don't need to have new ideas. We just need to apply the existing law and principles in a more robust and comprehensive way. And this is what the Global Compact on Refugees aims to achieve. It did not revise and change what already exists. We did not to do that. We just need to apply the laws, the treaties that already exist. But I don't know why some of us, or some of our countries, sometimes forget to implement it. And so we needed to, as parliamentarians, to think what happened to these people may happen tomorrow to one of us. We may think we have a good life. We are in peace. But if there is a coup d'etat tomorrow in our countries, if we need to run away to survive, the problem will be with us as well. And what happens if the country we are going decides a repatriation policy without achieve that people that will be repatriated will be safe? So we need to combat this kind of repatriation. Repatriation, I believe that it is what everyone wishes, to come back to their homes, families, friends, schools, jobs, but in a voluntary way, not repatriation as one obligation. But, of course, we know also that sometimes people are needed to leave their homes not as migrants, as refugees, but the problem of migration. And this is a different process, because many times people decide by their own to look for a better life. Of course, the major part of these migrants and movements happen inside the country, because people wish to stay where they know the language, where the culture will be similar. And so this is what happened in many countries, in many of our countries. But also may happen between countries when people wish to have a better life. Of course, we should think, if we achieve and implement sustainable development goals, the impact on migration will also be seen. Because it means that in all efforts of education, health, jobs, so economy, people will have opportunities at their home, and they won't need to leave it and try to find jobs in other countries. But it happened. And so the migrants' rights is something that you need to protect. I said the Turkish is one example of integration. And also, as parliamentarians, we should be open to learn with good practice, to see what the others are doing well, and if it's possible, to adopt to our own countries. Also, how to fight human trafficking, because human trafficking is something we should condemn every time. And we know that also it happened. It happened more often than we wish. We should also to avoid the speech of xenophobia that happened in many countries. For instance, now in many countries in Europe, where the extreme right is growing and growing with a speech of xenophobia against the people that needs to come to our countries to survive or to have a better life. Ladies and gentlemen, the IPU is always thinking about not figures, but about human beings. We parliamentarians, we represent the people, and so it's easy to understand that our job is to do everything and every day to defend them. That's why IPU defends the implementation completely of the Global Compact on Migration and on Refugees. And urge all of you, as a parliamentarians, to go on and to talk with your own governments and to understand how we may implement it. Because they are people-centered oriented. And this is the most important. They are not just to think about figures. This global conference takes place at a crucial time. And also we understand that the problem and the conflict here in Europe that affect Russia and Ukraine caused the most largest number of migrants and refugees in a short time since the Second World War. So it means that the problem may happen tomorrow, when we are not expecting it. And we should send a message from here and from Istanbul, this land and city that join Europe and Asia and so near to the other continents. We should work together to have a world where it's possible everyone to have a better life at their homes without the need to leave them, try to find a better life. Finally, I needed to say also that you understand that these programs will also need financing, because the problem of migration happens more to the developing countries of the world. And so the developed countries of the world need to understand that as the war between Ukraine and Russia affects all of us, in Africa where food storage as the problem of food, or in other countries in Latin America as a problem of inflation shows, also the problem of refugees affects all of us. That's why we need to understand that all is a problem not just from the neighbors. It's a problem that affects all of us. And of course, who have more resources should provide part of them to solve the problem of development, because this is the way to keep more people at home without the necessity to find another place to live. So, it will be 2 strong days, I believe, of discussions, hard discussions. We don't need to think the same way in all issues, but someone is doing well and we can adopt to our own countries. And it's possible, it will be possible to wish the situation of migration and refugees. Allow me to finish saying, you will have the opportunity to visit one exposition with faces.
My is Professor Mustafa Şentop, Speaker of the Grand National Assembly of Türkiye, to deliver his speech.
Parlamentolar arası
Esteemed President of IPU, Mr. Duarte Pacheco, distinguished speakers and deputy speakers of Parliament, I greet you with my most heartfelt feelings. Welcome to Türkiye. Welcome to Istanbul, the intersection point of history and civilizations. I'm very pleased and honored to come together with you here in Istanbul to discuss one of the most important and urgent global issues of our time, which is migration. And we are very pleased for that. The conference is titled Parliaments and the Global Compacts on Migration and Refugees, How to Bring About Stronger International Cooperation and National Implementation. I hope it will be beneficial and fruitful for all of us. I believe that this conference will be a guide for all of us on global migration, one of the most important issues of our time. Now I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the IPU, which supported us in bringing the conference idea to life, to the 54 participating countries and their valuable representatives, to international institutions and organizations. Welcome. By taking this opportunity, I would like to say that the main purpose of our presence here today is discuss the phenomenon of global migration that we are facing in the center of humanitarian, conscientious, and moral values, and to negotiate in order to offer an embracing, inclusive, and sustainable solution to this problem. I hope that this two-day-long conference will help us draw a perspective on global migration in this sense, and also to identify areas where source, transit, and destination countries can cooperate. I think that it's the moral and conscientious responsibility of all humanity to offer sustainable solutions to this global issue within the framework of the principle of equity, and to work on it sincerely. Of course, while we're putting forward our efforts on the subject, we must act by keeping in mind that all people are equal, and that the problem is the problem of all humanity, and that its solution is possible and sustainable as long as it is for the benefit of all humanity. So while approaching this issue, we must think about how to establish a decent life worthy of human dignity and honor for migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. We need to think about how these people can live humanely and safely in their homeland, how these countries, which have been made unlivable, exploited, and plundered, can be made livable again. Distinguished participants, this phenomenon of irregular and forced migration is no longer the problem of individual countries. It has become the problem of the whole world. The issue of migration shows us that the fate and future of all humanity is common. Migration has once again strongly confirmed that peaceful life, stability, development, prosperity, and future of all people in the globalizing world are majorly interconnected. So to contribute to the solution of this common problem we face and for a common future, together we have to fight with sincerity and in solidarity. The phenomenon of migration, it can be an occasion for building new solidarity and cooperation mechanisms and establishing a fair world. I hope that it will be an occasion for shallow interest calculations to be put aside and for the establishment of a new international system, an order embracing all people. So the phenomenon of migration as a driving factor for the establishment of a new paradigm can be possible. The issue of global migration today is the most important subject of fields such as international relations, political science, economics, legal science, sociology, anthropology, and human rights. So this phenomenon reminds us every day that humanity has entered a new stage, and accordingly, we need to approach the world, the planet, and social, economic, and political dynamics with a new perspective. It has different dimensions, and by its nature, it's an issue that transcends national borders. The local dynamics of the issue should not be ignored as much as its global nature. For this reason, we should take a holistic and at the same time an interdisciplinary approach to the center by taking into account the phenomenon of globalization when dealing with the phenomenon of migration. It is necessary to review the bilateral, regional, and global cooperation mechanisms and to reshape the outdated and partisan organizations which were established with the paradigms of the past but have become unable to produce solutions to today's problems. Because instead of understanding the problems of the societies they deem as other and producing solutions to them, these organizations function in such a way where they only impose responsibilities on some countries and entitle others to everything. So without the democratic transformation of the existing international institutions, neither the global migration issue nor the other issues facing humanity can be truly resolved. Today, these organizations have become a crisis in themselves, let alone finding solutions to the global problems such as the issue of irregular migration. This is why a healthy and sustainable handling of this global and transnational issue requires the establishment of inclusive, democratic, and transparent international organizations and cooperation mechanisms covering all countries and all humanity, where everyone is represented equally. Dear guests, today, due to war, terrorism, violence, and forced displacement, hunger, poverty, inequality, natural disasters, climate change, drought, and many other force majeure reasons, more than 300 million people have left their spouses, friends, property, home, country. They cross borders and seek to build a life for the future of their children in various parts of the world. Millions of stateless people seek asylum in various places without benefiting from any citizenship rights or meeting their basic human needs. Millions of asylum seekers or millions of refugees are driven to leave their homeland and start a new life in other countries in the hope of a new life. Most of these people are not yet 18 years old, a very important Part of them are vulnerable children and women. These people often set off on their journey, even risking death. They are victimized by human trafficking gangs, starved and threatened. Unfortunately, from time to time, they are drowned, die, or killed in the seas. In fact, very few refugees are in Europe today. The vast majority of these people seek refuge in developing countries or neighboring countries. According to the data of UNHCR, about 85% of asylum seekers go to developing countries. Again, about 73% of refugees are hosted in neighboring countries. Faced with an intense wave of migration for 10 years, Türkiye is currently the country hosting the highest number of refugees. Nearly 5 million people have taken refuge in our country. I can easily express that as Türkiye, we are trying to meet all kinds of needs of these people, especially humanitarian, social accommodation and education on our own, and we are trying to be a remedy to all of their problems. And as Türkiye, we protect the honor, dignity, and conscience of humanity on our own, we say. And I am proud to express that we will do our best to be the remedy of humanity. And we will continue to do everything for human dignity to be a cure. In this sense, Turkey sets an example. Türkiye sets an example for all countries in how the global migration issue should be handled. Turkey's experience and attitude will rightfully take its place as examples of good practice in academic studies on global migration. I would like to emphasize that the country hosting the largest refugee population since 2014, we see that this burden is unfortunately not shared fairly by the international community. Those who cause the problem turn their backs on the problem they cause. Türkiye is not a country responsible for this migration. These people come to Türkiye, a livable country, to escape the destruction caused by those who made their own country unlivable. Türkiye has embraced these people. Just as the issue of migration is not Turkey's problem, it's a great injustice that the material and moral burden of this problem is placed on Turkey's shoulders. Trying to put the burden of this problem on a few countries is a huge hypocrisy and inconsideration. We are witnessing that states which are supposed apostles of democracy, human rights, and international law, seeking harmony between their national legal orders and international human rights law when it comes to migrants. They don't implement these. These countries can easily trample on basic human values, let alone democracy and human rights, commit shameful practices. And I will name some countries here because we're witnessing people dying as Türkiye, as government officials. So in order to come with a solution to this problem, we have to speak honestly. Our neighbor, Greece, they do not hesitate to sink the inflatable boat of migrants whom they do not see as subjects of rights and law. They do not refrain from introducing pushback policies. Our ombudsman has a study done in Türkiye, and the relatives of these pushed back people have applied in Turkey, and now this study is turned into a report. It's a documentary, and we provided you with a short summary of this study. These people have been starved to death, and the European Union also closes its eyes to these inhumane treatments and even supports them, either explicitly or implicitly, from time to time. It will be enough for people of conscience to take a look at what has happened in the Mediterranean in recent years. These pushback incidents that have been facing in Europe in recent years have become a common practice. Since 2020, there are 40,000 irregular migrants from pushbacks have been saved by Türkiye in the Aegean Sea. Today, Western states, before talking about human rights, should be ashamed of using the words human and right by looking at the migrants who were frozen and drowned as a result of pushbacks in the Mediterranean and the dead bodies of migrants washed ashore. It should not be seen as negligence that Europe turns a blind eye to Greece's inhumane attacks on migrants and even supports such practices through mechanisms such as Frontex. There was a problem. You'll remember there were discussions about the budget of Frontex, and it was only a light sanction that was imposed. UK, same actually. The UK today sends asylum seekers to countries in Africa, exporting the migration problem to the third countries. In fact, following the decision of the European Court of Human Rights to cancel the flight that was supposed to carry asylum seekers in UK to Rwanda, the UK condemned the decision and argued that the court has exceeded its authority. They also state that he will send asylum seekers to Rwanda despite the court's decision. So the UK insisted on not to back down from this shameful decision on migrants so much that they were even discussing withdrawal from the European Convention on Human Rights. Again, France. As distinguished Pacheco said, xenophobia, Islamophobia today has reached such a level that they reached a primitive dimension such as building European Islam, and they are trying to intervene. They call it European Islam or European Muslims. So now they've reached these primitive levels. European countries once again revealed their hypocritical and discriminatory policies in the face of the sudden migration movement and refugee wave that emerged with the war in Ukraine. Those who talk about human rights and the law, they immediately put into effect policies that differed according to the color and the identity of the migrants. While European countries seek way to avoid responsibility and get rid of African, Middle Eastern, Asian, and American migrants by deporting or exporting them to third countries, by trying to deter and wear them out with pushbacks, by using force and criminalizing migrants. They set out to calculate the costs of refugees fleeing the war in Ukraine. And they started calculating these. We are faced with a worldview problem, a mentality problem. We're witnessing the expression of a mentality where one considers themselves as always right, privileged, but see other people they marginalize as just liable and indebted. These supposedly civil and human rights respecting countries that export their refugees to third countries, they are in a great moral crisis today. They are consciously trampling on human values. They seem far away from realizing and facing the mental eclipses they are experiencing. This mentality that forget the principle of equality and justice in their approach to migrants, to the phenomenon of global migration, and to human mobility. This mentality that turns a blind eye to the rising xenophobia, racism, and Islamophobia. This mentality cannot talk about human rights or equality. This is a crisis of humanity, morality, and conscience. Dear participants, there is no doubt that this racist, discriminatory, and anti-migrant mentality is not new. We see that morbid approaches such as racism, xenophobia, and marginalization are not left behind. We observe that these problems appear again and again in attitudes towards migration and migrants on many other occasions. This mentality, this paradigm has a long history. It is necessary to focus on the historical and intellectual dynamics in which this mentality developed. Racist, imperialist, and social Darwinist mentality patterns are highly influential components. So this mentality that we come across again and again, they are the practices against migrants today is a reflection of the Orientalist approach imposed by Eurocentric or West-centric paradigm. While this mentality sees the non-Western world as an object, it sees only the European white man as the subject of human rights. It's not possible for these shameful policies, this paradigm, this mentality to solve the global migration problem or to understand today's world. On the contrary, these are methods of escaping the problem. Europe should not escape the consequences of the destruction, exploitation, and plunder that's responsible for. They must now realize. Dear guests, I would like to talk about the issue of migration. The discussions about migration are on our agenda. 10 years ago, it wasn't like this. Now we're seeing increasing waves of migration, and I don't think it is going to end, and I'll give you some numbers. There is a huge demographic movement, a demographic transformation in Turkey. I'll share some numbers with you. 1,750 to 1950s. From 1750s to 1950s, 20% of world population lived in Europe, and 9 to 12% of world population lived in Africa until 1950s, and 50 to 55% of them lived in Asia. From 1950 to today, world population's 10% of world population is living in Turkey. So from 20 to 10%. In Africa, it's around 16, 17%. Asia, still 50, 55%. Now, according to demographic projections for the next 50 years, it is estimated that 5% of the population will live in Europe. So it is going down from 20% to 5%. In Africa, it will go up close to 45%. In Asia, it will stay same around 45, 50%, according to the projections. So this new demographic change will have some consequences, of course. These movements of population, they have the tendency to go to the rich parts of the world. So everything we discuss about migration, it's like an introduction chapter of a huge book. In the next 25, 50 years, we will be facing bigger problems about migration. And we're living in a global world. And a virus that emerged in China became contagious in the world. So it's not only the money that is global. It's not only commodity that's global. So viruses, diseases, they are also global. And remedies, cures should be global. Vaccination should be global. Treatment should be global, should be universal. Today, a person's problem in any part of the world is a problem of all humanity. If we cannot come to that conclusion on our own with our reasoning, tomorrow we will see that reality being imposed on all of us. So, like distinguished Pacheco said, so people should be able to live in their homelands with the standards If we don't work on the formula to provide that, we will not be able to prevent the migration waves. And these migration waves are going to change the balance of the world. So it is the right time. Although it's a burning problem, we have to come up with realistic, sustainable, permanent solutions. So this conference is a very good start. We will all take responsibility and we will deal with this problem equally. Then we'll be able to keep it at a manageable level. This is why we're here, and we'll have 6 different panels for 2 days, and we will be discussing, we will have the opportunity to discuss the phenomenon with all dimensions, and we'll be able to share our expectations and experiences. Representatives of our different institutions will be here with us to share our country's experience in this field with you. On this occasion, I hope that our work and consultations here will guide us in addressing the global issue of migration and the problems of migrants. And I would like to express my gratitude to all our valuable guests in advance for their contributions. I wish success to all participants attending the conference and thank all our friends for their support, especially my friend, the president of IPU, for cooperating with us to organize this conference. I greet you all with affection.
Thank you, Professor Şentop, for your speech. Distinguished guests, His Excellency Mr. Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, President of the Republic of Turkey, could not attend today's event with us due to his busy schedule. And now we will watch his video message.
Distinguished speakers, parliamentarians, distinguished guests, I would like to greet you all with heartfelt feelings. So, distinguished parliamentarians, I'm glad to see you in Istanbul, in the intersection point of civilizations and continents. So, I would like to extend my thanks to all the organizations who contributed their efforts to the realization of this event. So the discussions that will take place here and the discussions that you will have, the contacts you will have, hopefully they will be all fruitful and successful. IPU is convening different parliamentarians from different political backgrounds, so it is a very important dialogue platform. And parliamentarians are the representatives of our people, so for that reason their experiences, their opinions, and exchanging all these can happen via IPU. And in terms of finding global solutions to global problems, it is very important. Parliaments for refugees and migration. So today's conference is about parliaments and the global compacts on migration and refugees. Hopefully you will find solutions during this conference. With the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, hate speech increased dramatically. Economic problems, starting with the Western countries in all the world, increased xenophobia and also the resistance to refugees. And simultaneously, pandemic triggered economic crisis. For that reason, more people left their houses and countries. And generally, all over the world, at the moment, there are 275 million refugees and 75 million displaced people, and there are 30 million refugees all over the world. And the war between Russia and Ukraine and the conflicts, because of the conflicts there, 5 million more people are added to the existing number of refugees. So in these mobilities, because of these mobilities, we are coming across very dramatic scenes. So because of persecution, because of hunger, people run away from their countries for a safer life, but sometimes they do end up with calamities, disasters. And in the previous times, 13 80,000 refugees, most of whom are women and children, lost their lives in sea, and many Syrian children who sought refuge in Europe are not known about their whereabouts and where are they taken. And every day by Greek Greek law enforcement, people are exposed to killings and also persecution. So countries like us who are neighboring these crises are taking the burden of migration rather than Europe-like developed countries. And middle-income countries are hosting 5.8 million refugees compared to the developed countries, which is, for them, the figure is 2.7 million. And developed countries are not taking any responsibility for these crises. And as a country who is in the intersection point of civilizations, migration has always been an element of our history, starting from the Jews escaping from Inquisition. In the last 500 years, we have opened our doors to millions of people who are exposed to persecution, to our Caucasus relatives, to our people in Balkans. They always sought refuge in Turkey as a safe land. And in the first Gulf War, we have hosted many Kurd brothers and sisters coming from Iraq, and also we are hosting 3.6 million Syrian migrants in our country who fled from the crisis in their country. So we haven't closed our doors to anybody because of their race, religion, or color. So we are hosting the biggest number of refugees now in the world. And our history, our culture, our belief is giving this duty to us. And hopefully, inshallah, from now on, we'll be carrying out this duty. After the Second World War, the biggest mobility is now happening in our world, and nobody can run away from their responsibilities. International community if they do not show the courage to face the problems of migration, then we cannot solve these problems. So for that reason, the discussions to take place during this conference, the opinions that you will put forward, hopefully will contribute to the solution of these problems. And with all these notions, I would like to greet you with heartfelt feelings, and I would like to once again extend my thanks to the organizers of the meeting. So stay healthy.
For his kind message. Distinguished guests, and now it's time for the family photo. First of all, I would like to kindly invite Speaker of the Grand National Assembly of Türkiye, President of the IPU, Speakers of the visiting country parliaments, and Deputy Chairman on the stage for the family photo. Şimdi aile fotoğrafı zamanı. İlk olarak Sayın Türkiye Büyük Millet Meclisi.
For family photo, I would like to invite Speaker of Grand National Assembly of Turkey, President of IPU, and the visiting speakers of parliaments to the podium, please.
Tamam. Çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Distinguished guests, we have come to the end of our opening ceremony. We would like to invite all distinguished guests to the foyer area for exhibition on migrants and refugees. Distinguished guests, we have a coffee break for 50 minutes. Our program will continue with session 1 after the coffee break. Thank you for kind attention.
Birçok ülkenin sorunu karşısında duyarsız kaldıklarına şahit oluyoruz. Cesedi kıyıya vuran aylan bebeğin içimizi ürperten görüntüsü hala akıllarımızdadır. Bugün bu insanları itmek için, bunlara engel olmak için harcanan paralarla bu insanları kendi topraklarında, doğdukları topraklarda insanca yaşatmanın yollarını aramalıyız. Umut abi. Burası mı?
to take your seats, please.
Deputy Speaker olmazsa o yüzden sordum ben moderatör nerede oturuyor?
Başta Avrupa ülkeleri olmak üzere birçok ülkenin göç sorunu karşısında duyarsız kaldıklarına şahit oluyoruz. Cesedi kıyıya vuran aylan bebeğin içimizi ürperten görüntüsü hala akıllarımızdadır.
Bugün bu insanlara gitmek için, bunlara engel olmak için harcanan paralarla bu insanların kendi topraklarında, doğdukları topraklardan yollarını aramalıyız.
Bebeği dünya çok unutmayın ki bir gün ola ki aynı durum sizlerin de başına gelebilir.
Good morning, everybody. If you are kind to sit down, please, so we can start our first session of today. Louder? Okay, thank you. That's good. So, distinguished members of Parliament, distinguished speakers of Parliament, heads of delegation, our first session for today, International Governance Standards, Global Compacts and Global Policies Agenda, Targets, Commitments, Progress and Setback in Implementation. Our overall objective for today is to look at the global and regional progress made, remaining obstacles, and all the new opportunities with regard to implementation. We will mainly draw on the conclusions of the International Migration Review and also as well at the United Nations Secretary General Report of 27th of December 2021 and its 14 recommendation on the implementation on the Global Compact on Migration. This session will also present an overview of the vision and main content of the two global compacts with the aim to promote a better understanding of the philosophy behind the compacts, along with an appraisal of the nature of the commitments resulting from them. Today with us we have the Honorable Speaker of the Parliament of Azerbaijan, who held important positions at the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, positions related to migration. Also, she headed the Azerbaijani delegation to the Euronest Parliamentary Assembly. At present, Mrs. Sahiba Gafarova heads the delegation of the Azerbaijan to the Parliamentary Assembly of Turkic-speaking countries and to the CIS Inter-Parliamentary Assembly. Also with us in the panel, Mr. Philippe Leclerc, the representative of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. He has been working for UNHCR since 1990 in various countries like Cameroon, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Serbia, Slovenia, Afghanistan, and Syria. Mr. Gerald White, position of Chief of Mission in the International Organization for Migration, started in September 2021. Mr. White has 24 years of experience in migration management with prior expertise serving as Chief of Mission in Iraq, Somalia, Uganda, and South Sudan. Also, Mr. Patrick Tyran, President since 2011 of Global Migration Policy Associates, an expert network conducting research, policy development, advisory services, and training worldwide. With 35 years of full-time professional experience in international migration, immigration, refugee resettlement, and discrimination integration work at local, national, and global levels. To start our session today, I will invite the Honorable Speaker of Parliament of Azerbaijan for our keynote speak to the podium. Please, you have the floor.
Speaker of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey, Professor Dr. Mustafa Şentop, Honorable President of Inter-Parliamentary Union, Mr. Duarte Pacheco, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. First of all, on behalf of the Milli Majlis of the Republic of Azerbaijan, I wish to cordially greet all the parliamentary delegations attending conference on the Global Compacts on Migration and Refugees. I would like to express my gratitude to the Speaker of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey, Professor Dr. Mustafa Şentop, and President of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, Mr. Cheka for organizing this important. Choosing Turkey as a venue of this conference has another special significance because Turkey has been playing an important role in management of migration processes for the last 10 years. I hope that discussions within this framework will be useful in terms of addressing migration and refugee issues, which are important challenges of our time. Honorable colleagues, the theme of our conference is really of critical importance. I would like to thank the organizers for choosing me as the keynote speaker for this session. As the former chair of the Committee on Migration, Refugees and IDPs in the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe, I am glad and really interested in coming back to this issue again. Indeed, regulation of migration processes is one of the most important issues for many countries in the modern world. Generally, migration is recognized as a progressive process with numerous benefits and opportunities. It is characterized as an invaluable resource for the development and social renewal of any society. Contribution of migration to sustainable development is also recognized by the 2030 Agenda. However, phenomena of the last 20 years, such as political instabilities, social injustices, difficult economic and environmental conditions, armed conflicts, have aggravated this situation by changing the concept of migration in general. Refusal of the idea of multiculturalism has also had a serious impact on it. Unfortunately, for the last 2 years, COVID-19 pandemic has been another detrimental factor for migration. Honorable participants, I should note that adoption of global compacts on migration refugees after several years of debates is a real achievement and declaration of political will in those difficult times. These compacts are a triumph of multilateralism, proving to be a result of international cooperation aimed at finding comprehensive solutions to the problems of migrants and refugees. Today, there are many debates and differing views on the very notions on migrants and refugees and management of the process. It is enough to say that distinctions between the concepts of migrants and refugees become more and more invisible, which create contradictions. Many still argue on regular and forced migration, raise concerns over whether addressing migration at its roots or at the points of destination, whether sovereignty and security of borders should prevail over human rights of migrants and refugees or not. There are still questions on how to ensure that migrants and refugees are more effectively integrated into communities and economies, as well as return back to the countries of origin in a secure and dignified manner. Dear colleagues, against the background of the before mentioned, everybody would agree that much should be done. And the first and foremost is to share the burden and responsibility for hosting and supporting migrants and refugees. In this context, among other countries contributing to the management of migration processes, I would like to highlight the role of Turkey. For the last 10 years, Turkey has been one of the countries most affected by migration, hosting more than 4 million migrants. Indeed, the high level of economic and social development reached by Turkey and human-centered policies adopted with regard to migration are favorable for migrants. But these factors are not the only reasons for Turkey's huge contributions. It is also because of high moral values of Turkish society, which feels the pain and sufferings of migrants and refugees. I believe Turkey's efforts should be more praised and supported in terms of burden sharing by international community. Honorable colleagues, the review of the past period since the adoption of the both compacts is important from the point of view of implementation process. Despite all differing views, I believe that the main philosophy underpinning the both compacts can be described with one phrase, which we all know: leave no one behind. Indeed, those compacts are not perfect. They have their limitations. In fact, They are not unambiguously accepted by all countries. Maybe they do not reflect all interests of involved parties equally. Of course, some of them have own views on those documents. But let's agree that they are unique and a very important step forward in dealing with the manner. Those refugees, which are based on international law, they prove that can alone address these challenges and should unite their efforts. Fortunately, the past period has shown the willingness of international community in voluntary implementation of the compacts and increased cooperation at global, regional, and national levels. The results of the Global Refugee Forum and the International Migration Review Forum is a clear proof of it. Touching upon the role of the parliaments in this process, I strongly believe that as the representatives of our people, we, members of parliaments, should also do more in helping our governments to manage the situation in the better way. Holding regular discussions with all the stakeholders, amending and improving migration legislation in line with provisions of the compacts can be important in this regard. Honorable participants, in accordance with the theme of our panel, I would like to share with you information on the state of implementation of both compacts by my country, by Azerbaijan. Located in an important geographical point at the crossroads of East and West, Azerbaijan has always been a place of dynamic migration. As a result of rapid socio-economic development, foreign investments and implementation of international projects in energy, transport, and other areas, Azerbaijan has been transformed from a country of origin to a country of transit and destination for migrants. The high level of tolerance in our country is also another important factor influencing the migration process. Thus, the effective regulation of migration processes in accordance with international norms and national legislation, as well as the protection of the rights of migrants, are a priority for our migration policy. It should be mentioned that Azerbaijan became one of the first countries to join both global compacts and has undertaken several measures on implementation of them. In the first Global Refugee Forum, in December 2019, the government of Azerbaijan undertook a number of voluntary commitments to support and share international responsibility for refugees. Relevant measures have been successfully implemented to ensure a compulsory medical insurance for refugees and legal labor rights, as well as to provide tuition fees to refugee students studying in higher education institutions. And Azerbaijan is among the first countries in the region which established a UN network on migration at national level in July 2020 and joined the Champion Countries initiative launched in September of the same year under the auspices of the United Nations Migration Network. Besides, our country submitted a national voluntary report in 2020 on the implementation of the Global Migration Compact, as well as the update of this report in March 2022. Last month, our country participated in the first ever International Migration Review Forum as one of the 33 champion countries. Azerbaijan was also one of the 8 countries to co-chair 4 roundtables during the forum. There is also a plan to establish a regional training center on migration with the help of International Organization for Migration. Honorable colleagues, in 2020, the Republic of Azerbaijan put an end to the occupation of its territories by Armenia, which continued for almost 30 years. As a result of the occupation, 1 million Azerbaijanis became refugees and IDPs, homeless, jobless, and without any means for living. Despite heavy social and economic burdens of the occupation, our government took all necessary measures to meet their needs. Liberation of the occupied lands created new realities and opportunities for peace and prosperity in the region, as well as ensuring the rights of IDPs to return to their homeland, to Karabakh. So Azerbaijan is on the eve of dynamic internal migration processes. At the same time, the restoration and reconstruction works carried out in these lands, the measures taken to reintegrate these regions into the overall economy of the country will make Karabakh and Eastern Zangezur an attractive place in terms of tourism, investment, and the establishment of new businesses. This, in turn, will lead to the introduction of new approaches to migration management, bringing new dynamics to migration processes in both Azerbaijan and the region. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker of Parliament of Azerbaijan. We'll further continue our session with a discussion with the panelists, followed by interventions from the room. We already have the request for the floor, and if you further want to contribute, you have slips of papers that you need to fill in. And then if you raise your hands, the hostesses will come and pick up the paper and bring them to us. To continue our conversations, I will be your host for today. My name is Silvia Dinica. I'm a Romanian senator, vice president of the Romanian IPU group. I will start with Mr. Leclerc. The Global Compact on Refugees was adopted in 2018 to further open up the conversation and refresh our memories. Can you tell us what are the defining features of the Global Compact on Refugees, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Senator. I want to thank as well the President of the Grand National Assembly and the President of the IPU for hosting this event on a symbolic day, World Refugee Day, at a time where the number of refugees and displaced persons has reached the 100 million limit that we would all like not to have happened. As you have mentioned, the Global Refugee Compact was out of a process of the General Assembly with the New York Declaration, deciding to have two global compacts in 2018. And for the Global Compact on Refugees, let me remind you of the main objectives of this compact, which is to ease the pressure on host countries hosting refugees, to enhance the self-reliance of refugees, to expand access to third country solutions, as well as to support conditions in countries of origin for return in safety and dignity. These are four important objectives that should be met at the same time, despite the high number of refugees and displaced number of internally displaced that we witness. The GCR has an introduction part which is describing the principles of international cooperation which are required for burden sharing and responsibility sharing. I just want to remind you that the main legal document of the United Nations which was governing and continues to govern refugee status is the Geneva Convention, but it mostly defines the status of a refugee, the rights and obligations of such persons with that status, and some basic principles like the principle of non-refoulement. It refers to the international cooperation in its preamble, but the Global Compact on Refugees is there to ensure, with its large adoption by almost all countries of the United Nations, to implement international protection through responsibility sharing and burden sharing, which is, again, as the figures that we show today on World Refugee Day, encompasses that most of the refugees are hosted in neighboring conflicts and in low and middle income countries. It is therefore required that additional support is provided on a regional basis and universally to support these low and middle income countries. And I'm just again want to highlight the fact that it's very important that symbolically both World Refugee Day and this meeting is taking place in the country hosting the largest number of refugees, 7 million persons with temporary protection on the basis of a legislative framework of 2013 and the first country in recent times to implement a temporary protection regulation. This has allowed and continues to allow most of the Syrians living with temporary protection in this country with a very important medical support, access to education, and access to livelihoods. The other element I just want to highlight at this stage is the focus on solutions, meaning both voluntary repatriation conditions of dignity and security, as well as the necessary increase of resettlement as a burden-sharing mechanism. As you know, the number of persons who are resettled to third countries remain far lower than the needs. If you don't mind, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will turn now to Mr. Waite for a similar question regarding the Global Compact on Migration, adopted together with the Global Compact on Refugees in 2018. Mr. White, what does this document aim to achieve and how do we do it?
Thank you very much, Senator, and thanks and respects to the hosts for this occasion. In broad terms, and remembering the origins or the birth of the Global Compact on Migration, I'd like to highlight that that it was born of a certain time. This was shortly after and kind of in response to the migration crisis which took place in Europe in 2015 and 2016. And from this situation, really, the international kind of interest around drawing up such a compact developed. But I think certainly one of the aims of the document and one of the achievements of the documents is in the way that it managed to lift itself away from this particular context, from the particular issues which related to particularly perceptions or European perceptions about what was happening in terms of migration. It formulates a document, it is laying down a document which was drafted by member states primarily with some technical guidance from other sources, which encapsulates the interests, the concerns of all states who participated in its drafting, and that includes states which send migrants, states that receive migrants, and the countries that they transition in between. So moving away from this concept that maybe the Global Compact is a collection of objectives. Sure, it has those, but it is more than that. The primary objective of the document was to encompass a global perspective and to represent the interests of all states who participated in the drafting of the document. So the document reflects that migration is a fundamental fact of our existence. There is no state, no peoples that over time will not be affected by migration. So it recognizes and enshrines this concept. It enshrines the idea that regular migration can be a benefit to countries. It can be an essential part of development in a world where migration is, in fact, a necessity. And, of course, it also prepares for cautions around the effects of unregulated migration. It defines common approaches, the 23 common objectives, define, if you will, what good migration management looks like. And I reiterate the fact that these objectives were developed from a global perspective, not just from the perspective of states which receive migrants. The GCM also provides for a number of tools from capacity building. This was a request from the states. So this includes networks of specialists in migration to advise each other on migration issues, which again is of global in scope. It established a multi-party trust fund, trust fund for establishing grants operated between the United Nations and signatories in order to work on issues related to delivering on the 23 objectives. And the document also, as has been mentioned by some of our other colleagues, provides a framework for review and assessment. So looking at the aims of the document overall, I would highlight that its primary objective, its overarching objective, is to provide a framework for multilateralism. It sets out a series of objectives, of goals, which are universal in scope, and it provides a framework against which we can assess the performance of signatories and provides a sequence for reviewing those. And this, I think, is its major achievement. It was its major aim of the document. It's the major achievement of the document to provide a basis for multilateralism. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I turn now to Mr. Taran. The global compacts were developed in the context of an international normative framework on governance of migration and protections of migrants and refugees that comprises human rights conventions, international labor standards, and global and regional refugee instruments. Can you tell us about these international governance standards and how the global compacts should complement and support the implementation of these standards, please?
Yes, and thank you. And thank you to the Grand National Assembly of Turkey and to the IPU for organizing this extremely important event. I'd like, in fact, to set a bit of context for this discussion on the compacts. And that's basically to say that there is an international normative legal framework of conventions, of international labor standards, of human rights instruments, and of course the Refugee Convention and Protocol that provide a framework that is coherent, consistent, and in fact very constructive to provide the standards to be domesticated into national law to ensure that migration and all of its related aspects are governed under the rule of law and, in fact, under the, if you will, supervision and monitoring role of national parliaments, who are, in most countries, the legislative body that makes the laws of the land. There are three areas of international law that are particularly important. You mentioned them, Madam Moderator: human rights conventions, international labor standards, and in the global sense, the 1951 Convention and the 1967 Protocol on the Status of Refugees. I would also mention, of course, on the latter, that in certain regional contexts, such as Africa, there are regional normative instruments on refugee protection and assistance. What I want to underline is that migration is a question that affects all areas of society, of economies, of life in countries. And they're all areas that require normative and legislative governance. I can go on and on with the list of the different areas. You know them all, I think. What I want to underline is that this has been a preoccupation of the international community for nearly 100 years. You may not know, but the first global conference on migration took place in 1923 in Italy under the auspices of the then fledgling International Labor Organization. The first convention dealing with the protection of migrants, migrant workers, was elaborated in the 1930s. And since 1949 and the elaboration of the first ILO convention, which was actually a revised convention, we have a series of instruments, not only in general on human rights that apply to migration, all migrants and refugees. We have three specific international instruments that can be said to provide the framework for governance of migration. The International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families. And I'm pleased to be in the country that was the third country to ratify that convention, Turkey, and Azerbaijan was one of the other countries that ratified that convention to bring it into force already a couple of decades ago. And if I look also at ILO conventions on migration for employment, together with the International Convention, I suspect that most countries in this room have either signed or ratified one of those important conventions. I won't go further on that because the question comes back to the global compacts. And all I would like to conclude in a first comment in saying is that these conventions, these instruments that require parliamentary action to ratify and domesticate, to make them part of the law of your land, are also the foundations for the implementation of the global compacts, both on refugees and on migrants. And the realization of those compacts will not happen in any significant way without the implementation of the standards that underlie the principles that were laid out in those compacts, and those compacts as well provide in some ways an implementation roadmap, both for the Convention Protocol on Refugees and the Global Compact on Refugees, and similarly, the Global Compact on Migration clearly depends on and derives from not only human rights standards, some of which, for example, the International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and we heard from the President and others this morning about how important addressing racism and xenophobia is. We also have the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women that provide an important reference for the Global Compact's concern that dealing with migration be gender responsive. We have reference to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and of course, other human rights instruments, and I come back to saying that the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of all Migrant Workers and Members of their Families should be the core standard framework adopted by all parliaments of the countries represented in this room, those that haven't done so, and that will provide the basis for effective implementation over time of the global compacts. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you very much. I will have now a question, same question for each of you. You mentioned it will be soon 4 years since the global compacts were adopted, and I would like to know the opinion of each of you. Where have we made progress in implementation, and where do you see the main challenges, both old and new? And please respond, each of you, from your perspective, from your specific area or of work. And since, well, maybe we should not keep the same order. Mr. White, if you want to start, please.
Sure, thank you very much. Okay, in terms of looking at progress and challenges, and of course focusing, from my perspective, focusing on the GCM, I think progress, I would mention, is, and somehow referring to my kind of previous points, that one of the areas where we've clearly seen progress is in the bedding down, if you wish, of the Global Compact on Migration. I think we're all aware during the formation of the Global Compact, there were various states which voted against or abstained on the agreement, based around lots of discussions and arguably misinformation as to the non-binding nature of the agreement. But we saw, at least in the IMRF, in the review forum, that that some of those even some of those states which had abstained or voted against the compact were taking part. There's clearly some of the reservations after some years of working with the compact have been removed, and there is a greater sense of global participation, particularly from some states that had originally voiced their concerns. We have seen also the flourishing of some of the mechanisms that have been that were constructed underneath the Global Compact. We have, my colleague from Azerbaijan mentioned the champion countries. We now have 33 champion countries, and extremely pleased and proud that Turkey recently joined that list. We have 70 country and regional-based UN migration networks which are operating throughout the globe. We have, I think, 12 active projects under the Multi-Partner Trust Fund working in the implementation of the GCM 23 objectives. I would, however, like to highlight some of the challenges. These have also been mentioned by some of our speakers during the introduction. There is still a large number of fatalities taking place along migratory routes. Last year, IOM's missing and dead migrant project calculates 14,000 people were killed or missing during 2021. We also have some challenges clearly still around the coverage, the inclusivity, the concepts of inclusivity which run throughout the Global Compact on Migration, the coverage and portability of social security benefits and other entitlements remains a challenge to be overcome. But again, we see some positive indications in that way. And I would highlight, I think, during the COVID period, we see both some of the progress and the limitations were highlighted during that period. During an extraordinary halt to mobility, in many instances, migrants were stranded or otherwise forcibly removed, and there was, I think it was mentioned by some colleagues earlier, the hostile rhetoric which accrued about migrants during the COVID-19 period. However, we also saw at the same time a recognition of the vital role that migrants played during the COVID-19 response. And somewhat ironically, you might say, on occasions in the same country you had both anti-migrant settlement and migrants supporting the COVID-19 responses. But in general, there were positive indications there. Many states did support the inclusion of migrants, very actively support the inclusion of migrants within their campaigns against COVID-19. We also saw during the COVID period some generous and forward-looking policies from members on the alternatives, providing alternatives to detention for migratory purposes. Halting of forced removals also was witnessed during this period. Regularizations of stays, constructive, pragmatic approaches were taken to address the fallout of the pandemic related to migration, migratory communities in many, many incidents. So the key now is to continue with the positives and learn from the negatives, and to continue to address the concerns of states that struggle still with the inclusivity, particularly the inclusivity conditions, objectives of the Global Compact on Migration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe Mr. Taran, you want to go further to answer the same question, please?
Yes, I think I will take it again to a bit of context and look at what is happening in the context of implementation of the Global Compacts. And here I would say that the big picture we're looking at is something on the way of the great regression in terms of treatment of migrants, understanding of migration, protection for refugees, and so on and so forth. I only have to pick up the words that the President of Turkey said this morning, and the other speakers, Mr. Pacheco and others, to talk about the rise in xenophobia, the closing of borders, the effect on migrants and attitudes towards migrants that have mushroomed during the pandemic, making a situation that I would suggest is only getting worse, and we're not yet even able to make the compacts the vehicles to effectively stop the regression, let alone achieve significant progress out there in the world. And we talked, and I heard the word crisis. But I think in many ways the world is getting it wrong on migration because the real crisis hasn't yet been put on the floor here. And that's the crisis of the changes in our economic system, the changes in population, and the changes in what's going on in making it possible to continue to sustain economies. Look, to give you a few figures, the German workforce declines by 6 million people in the next 10 years. The Russian workforce since the year 2000 has declined by 12 million. The Chinese workforce has declined by 40 million. The demographics suggest that half or more of the countries in the world are at what we call fertility rates of reduction of population, not even holding it steady. And to use an allegory from one country, the Republic of Korea, their demographers almost joke that if the current fertility rate for the Korean population remains what it is today, the Korean population will be extinct in about 700 years. And I note that the Korean fertility rate is pretty much the same as the Italian rate, the Spanish rate. And I note that Turkey, by the way, and Azerbaijan, among other countries in this region, including Iran, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and others, are all facing a similar demographic, if you will, aging and decline of the population, which means that to sustain economies, more migration, skilled and less skilled, is absolutely on the agenda, and it absolutely has to be both protected and regulated, and, if you will, managed in a way to make sure that economies remain sustainable. You're not going to keep a sustainable economy in any country in the world unless you have skills that are coming from elsewhere. If you look at even the most significant countries of origin of migrants or of refugees, you'll find many of the teachers, the university professors, the managers in corporations and so on are in fact from other countries. What you'll also note, and I want to just put this very emphatically, 50 to 80% of migration in the world today takes place within regional economic communities. European Union, Economic Community of West African States, Mercosur, and I can go on and on. What that also means is that one of the alternatives and solutions to some of the problems that are identified, particularly in the Global Compact on migration, is the success of free circulation regimes in both providing people regular channels to move and making sure that the market demand for skills and labor in particular regions can reach to much larger, if you will, populations of people with skills and so on. And that has been clearly one of the pillars of the success of the European Union. And it is seen as one of the successes. And I put that on the agenda because that is part of what both the regulatory framework I spoke about is needed for, and part of what the Global Compact, particularly on migrants, but also on refugees, can help with. And I just note that free circulation also plays a role in protection for people in refugee-like situations. That is to say, if you're in a country within an area of free circulation, and there's a problem, a coup or whatever, as was evoked earlier this morning, having the possibility simply to go to a border, go across it, and seek safe haven somewhere without even saying you're seeking safe haven but going to get a job is a way of providing protection for people in refugee-like situations. I'll leave it at there, but perhaps we can come back to this in the discussion because I think this is crucial for understanding what we're facing and what countries like our host country, Turkey, are facing, that has already developed flexible regimes of movement between Turkic-speaking countries in the region to help provide labor and skills to meet or compensate for the decline in and aging of the Turkish working population. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sure, we will continue the discussion. Mr. Leclerc, what is your opinion on the challenges and the implementation so far?
The challenges are there. Going from migration to the specific forced displacement angle of the Refugee Global Compact, one has to see that, as foreseen, at least from the process point of view, 5 main countries came to chair the first Global Refugee Forum, and among them, of course, was the President of the Republic of Turkey, Germany, Costa Rica, Pakistan, and Ethiopia. Many pledges were made in 2019, but they were immediately confronted to, as we have all said, the pandemic and the way by which countries have responded to it, often leaving aside refugees and foreigners in the immediate access to vaccination or even response. But we have seen, particularly also in this country and many countries all over the world, the quick capacity to extend the response both to migrants and refugees, as we continue to see here. Obviously, it is an issue that we see less solutions. Today, if I compare with the 32 years I have been working in UNHCR, the number of voluntary returns remains so low. It happens in some areas, and this is why Filippo Grandi today is in Abidjan, in the Côte d'Ivoire, because the cessation of refugee status can be pronounced when conditions are made by the state of origin, the neighboring states, to allow the formal return with guarantees of dignity and security of people like the 90% of Côte d'Ivoire citizens who are now going back to their country, but as well engaging with the neighboring countries so that persons who have been staying for a long time in the neighboring countries of Côte d'Ivoire will be able to see their future either as permanent residents or even for some as acquiring the citizenship of the neighboring country. But this today is more an exception than the reality because of the difficulties of the international community, of also regional entities to be able to solve durably conflicts, if not war. And this is why I have to insist on the high number of internally displaced and refugees that we witness, with more conflicts emerging in the Sahel in particular, but also in all over the world. Ukraine war with the Russian Federation bringing more refugees to the fear as well as internally displaced. But at the same time, we have seen that within the Global Compact on refugees, within the instruments that are focusing on plans of action at the regional level, I think we can quote some, and I hope some of you will mention these, the Comprehensive Regional Protection and Solutions for Central America and Mexico, the Nairobi process led by the IGAD, focusing in particular on displacement regarding Somalians, both within Somalia, as you know, also affected by drought, but also in the neighboring countries, so that this discussion takes place within the region and supported by the donor community. All these are important processes, of course, affected by the movements that we have seen. There is the solution strategy for Afghan refugees, but which has been affected by last summer, the change of power in Afghanistan, which again does not mean that we should not continue looking for solutions with the support of national parliaments and the IPU in identifying both the obstacles, but again, the responses through regional dialogue to conflicts, enabling voluntary return under conditions of dignity and security.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Since we are at the parliamentary meeting, we can further zoom in, and I'm going to ask again all of you, how can parliaments be proactivating in domesticating international standards and policy for migration governance and overseeing government implementation of national legislation in line with the international law? How do we do it? Who'd like to start and answer first? Okay, sure. Please, Mr. White.
Thank you very much. Yes, I will. I'll be quick. It's a very pertinent question. I think the most evident way is to be able to capitalize on on Parliament as parliamentarians, as the arbiters of reasoned, balanced debate, to act against the forces, really, that we can see, which can appear, for xenophobia, which has been mentioned several times, and in other contexts, the political instrumentalization of migrants for political purposes, and to ensure that the language that is used about migrants avoids, does not dehumanize, even when meant well, even when using the positive language about migrants, we can often define them as bringing economic benefit, as if human beings can be reduced to their economic contribution. We see language hordes, swarms, unregulated. There's a lot of language which circulates around migrants that we would really urge and think the parliamentarians have a particular role to play, because you have the power to convene, which others do not have. You have a connection with affected populations, with migrant populations. You have a direct relationship with them, are able to convene and interact with them, and so have a unique understanding of those communities, and have the ability structurally within governance of countries to make sure that all voices are heard and that Parliament is a platform to incorporate all perspectives. Of course, there is the core function of Parliament as the check on government, as a generator of sound legislation based on this unique ability you have to convene and to interact directly with populations, to ensure that the legislative framework represents those populations in a fair way and ensures inclusivity of the population. Finally, to acknowledge in the GCM Progress Declaration, a very specific mention is made there of the contributions of parliamentarians, of parliaments towards the implementation of the GCM. I'd like to acknowledge that and to express IOM's appreciation for that. It was mentioned both in general terms of the objectives of the GCM, but also in the response to COVID, where again, specifically the role of parliaments and parliamentarians is mentioned as providing as a very, very positive impact. So thanks and appreciation to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Taran, please.
Well, let me be a bit more practical, and I will be practical from the experience of being the Washington representative for an organization I worked with in the 1980s. And in fact, I worked with Jerry Tinker, who was Chief of Staff for Senator Edward Kennedy, whose name I'm sure many of you know, who was also head of the Refugee and Migration Committee of the United States Senate. And what I can say in practical terms to answer your question is bing, bing, bing, bing. There are certain steps that any parliament can take. First of all, formulate and introduce legislation or a bill to call on or authorize the state to ratify or accede to the conventions that they haven't ratified or acceded to. It's usually a parliamentary decision, often by the upper house, to actually ratify an international standard. The administration can propose, but it is the parliament that approves. Secondly, once the legislation is introduced, the issue should be put on the agenda of all of the relevant committees for committee discussion. And that's not only the Labor and Social Affairs Committee, it should be discussed by a Migration and Refugee Committee, as you have it, as Madame Grappa noted that the PACE, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, has a specific committee that deals with refugees and migrants, similarly for the European Parliament, which also suggests that those of you whose parliaments also participate in regional assemblies should also make sure the agenda, the item is added to the agenda, for example, the East African Parliament, or you name it, Mercosur, or South America has a regional parliament, and so on and so forth. Third, then, is you have it on the agenda, it's convene hearings. Hearings are a good way to provide the testimony, the witness, the information both about the situation and the imperatives for the country to ratify. And that is, as you know, and better than I, part of the steps then to get the legislation moved from and approved by a committee to the floor of your chamber and approved so that those international standards that your country hasn't ratified that you need for effective governance are approved. And then, of course, the process proceeds with making sure that your national legislation is put into conformity with those standards, and or you create new legislation to make sure that they are not only ratified vis-a-vis the world, but they're domesticated in your own national law and therefore implementable and reviewable both by the Congress and by your judicial branch of government.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Leclerc, what do you think we should do?
To do, as we witness in many parliaments all over the world. And I think what we are doing with the Inter-Parliamentary Union, also the handbooks that we have been working on, show multiple ways by which parliamentarians can act, both at the national, regional, and universal level, be it to implement, as you have said, when they have been acceded to the refugee conventions. What we have been working on together with you and many parliaments and the IPU is also ending statelessness, and we see quite a lot of progress. If that's one field where we have seen more acquisition of nationality by stateless persons in many parts of the world, I think, as Patrick was mentioning, it's very important to ensure that not only the conventions are acceded to and legislation put in force, but respected and continue in the spirit in which they have been built. Today, in the Grand National Assembly of Turkey, we do hope that the legislative framework of 2013 and the temporary protection regulation, which serve as an example for so many legislations in the world, can be further implemented so that the practical access of refugees with temporary protection can be measured as we go. It's very important, again, also to work on combating xenophobia, as many of you have reported, including violations of international law through pushback, violations of the principle of non-refoulement. I note the special report of the Ombudsman of Turkey. I remember in working in Greece the importance that the Greek Ombudsman has to ensure so that the pushback and refoulement allegations can be corrected and that all countries abide by international law and refrain from practices which are weakening the international refugee system, because the first entitlement to which refugees have the right to is access to safety, access to protection. And this is because this violation is taking place all over the world that UNHCR has decided, rather than the consequences of the climate change that it had envisaged, to focus on the right to safety, which is in the Geneva Convention that many states have ratified, but which is currently denied to so many persons because of the erection of walls and the inability of individuals to flee and ask for protection. This is a very concrete way that you can make sure that the legislation and the international law abiding by your countries can be respected through auditions, questions and inquiries that many of your parliaments are making. I will stop there because the examples can be numerous, and I'm sure you will give them better than I will.
Thank you very much. We now move to the part of the session where we take intervention from the room. We have for the moment 9 requests for intervention. Some are from the same country, so I kindly ask you when you start your intervention to present yourself, and then please be brief and stay on topic and try to limit your intervention to 2 minutes. I propose to take 5 interventions and then we'll let our panelists to answer. We start with Iraq, and then it will be Pakistan. So please, Iraq, have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. My greetings from the land of civilization from Mesopotamia. Actually, Iraq has been part of this agreement in 2012, and we have supported this agreement, and we started doing this through a strategy or a plan, a national plan through the Ministry of Migration, and this was in September 2020. And actually, we have implemented this through the government of Iraq and Kurdistan region, and we have implemented this through laws we have established. We have included all the items, and this was part of our legislations. Why? Because Iraq have incubated so many Syrians. In Kurdistan, we have so many camps as well. We kept their dignity as well. In the past, we have received the Palestinians. Actually, there is an important issue here. The goal, amongst the goals of this compact, is to share the burden between the hosting countries and between also the other countries. What we have noticed through our work in the Ministry of Migration of Iraq in 2020, 2021, and through our visits to the neighboring countries where Iraqis are, especially in Lebanon, in Jordan, as well as in Turkey. we did not see that there is a clear implementation of this agreement because most of the Iraqis who are in those neighboring countries until this moment were not allowed to get permission to work. And there are so many families who live below the poverty line in those neighboring countries. And this is very harmful for their economic and health situation. Actually, it is very important for this compact to be included in the laws of the neighboring countries so that they can be living a life of dignity in those countries until they move to the final destinations. And I would also give from my time to my colleague, Ms. Vian. She's also representing the Yazidis in the parliament. Ivan Jaber, I'm representing the Christians of Iraq and in Iraq. So from my time, if you may allow me to do this, I would give from my time the floor to my colleague. Thank you very much. My name is Vian Dakhil. I'm a member of the Parliament of Iraq. I'm from Kurdistan region. I represent the component of the Yazidis. I am originally from Sinjar, representing this area. Actually, when we talk about these issues in such a conference, when we talk about refugees and the forced displacement, we remember what had happened to the minorities of Iraq on the hands of the terrorist group Daesh in 2014. Daesh, the terrorists, have attacked Sinjar, and they have committed a genocide to all the Yazidis in that area and the rest of the minorities, the Christians, the Shias, of the Turkmen Shias, which have led to the displacement of over 90% of the demographic population of Kurdistan. So a lot of people from the minorities of Iraq have seek refuge outside the country under very bad circumstances. As Yazidis, we have been exposed to genocide. Over 12,000 people have been killed. Our women have been kidnapped. The children have been kidnapped by Daesh, over 7,500 of them. Until this moment, these areas are not stable. Sinjar is not stable. And at the same time at which Turkey receives such a conference talking about refugees, about 10 days ago, almost a week, the Turkish forces have bombarded Sinjar, which had led to killing civilians, amongst of which a child who was only 9 years old. Yes, we condemn having the PKK inside those areas, and we hope that to cooperate with the Turkish government on combating such an organization. Nonetheless, it's not the fault of the civilians of those areas to be bombarded. Those military attacks and operations are what makes people leave their areas. This is why they are displaced. And then after that, they go to other countries. Even in the other countries, in the neighboring countries, we've seen recently that those countries are not giving them the enough, they need enough to be going to those countries.
Or the representative of Pakistan. It will be followed by Chad.
Thank you very much. From the very outset, let me express my gratitude to Grand National Assembly of Türkiye and IPU for inviting us, organizing this great event for us. Let me also remind each one of you that being a responsible state, a member state of United Nations, we respect global compacts either on refugee or it is on migration. But just like we heard a video message by the great leader of the world today, His Excellency Tayyip Erdogan, that the decency of humanity, the dignity of humanity demands that we must take action implement the United Nations guideline with the same spirit as human being. And we should not make hostage to our national interest. Let me also remind my colleagues that Pakistan has two distinct characters. One, that we host more than 3 million refugees back in 1979 with a little help from international community. We have done everything. We have followed, integrated that community. Just imagine for 40 years, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres just about a year ago visited Pakistan, and he admired the compassionate and the greatness of the people of Pakistan hosting those for that long. But again, there were some other members so rightly and eloquently said that what mistake Pakistan has made when the superpower is spending $1 trillion just feeding the warlords, not helping the Afghan refugees, and then they left it to underdeveloped country Pakistan, whose economy is bleeding. And for 40 long years, we've been host to this great country of Afghanistan. And if you ask any Afghani today, the anger, the rage that they would express will be beyond any human measures. So I'm asking each one of you, when are you going to be sharing your responsibility, repatriating all those with voluntarily safe and with dignity? When the trauma that the Afghans people are suffering for the last 40 years because not of their own fault, but the superpower played dirty roles in their region, and Pakistan and the people of Pakistan are paying for that follies. Ladies and gentlemen, it is just about the time that we must think about refugees as a human being. We must think that when you tarnish their image, their life is devastated. So each one of you, for me, honorable member of United Nations, let us stick to the compact and think about it as to how we can implement through Parliament, enacting the law. And we have done everything within our power, but at the same time, the international community must come forward, repatriate those die-hard Afghanis who've been in a different country, in a different environment. For 40 long years, again, I'm saying, I hope the international community
please
would
wrap
respect.
up. Thank you. I have now the following list for the request to take the floor. Chad, Morocco, United Arab Emirates, Iran, Rwanda, Pakistan, and Algeria. And because we are constrained by the time, we are forced to close the list. So further, I invite Chad to take the floor, and it will be followed by Morocco. Thank you.
Merci. Distingués invités, en vos rangs, grades et qualités.
Distinguished guests, distinguished participants, distinguished members of the protocol, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, of course, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to all of you, to IPU, Turkish Republic. So they successfully organized this conference on migration Along with this meeting, we'll be having a sounder cooperation at the global level. So our aim is to realize this. My country, Chad, is a transit source and a destination country for migration. And migration phenomenon in our country, in the way that I express, happens likewise. Between January and March 2022, because of the migration fluxes to Faya and to Yukya regions, there are 45,000 people for 90 days they have come, and daily 500 people came from that region, and 420 people were interviewed to identify some profiles, some fluxes and mobilities. And also, our country strengthened its institutional and legal mechanisms for migration, and to strengthen its migration governance in accordance with the international conventions, a new law was enacted so that illegal entries of migrants, and also to combat migrant smuggling, we have enacted this law in accordance with UN conventions. And also there are some other national consultation mechanisms. And in July 2019, a 3-year action plan was enacted for 2019 and 2022. And a national review committee has been established so that migrant smuggling and human trafficking can be handled. Therefore, with the realization of this action plan related to migration issues, all the coordination was aimed to be ensured. And with the enactment of these governance mechanisms, some shortcomings were identified in a better manner. We have organized many workshops about irregular migrants and human trafficking. And also, in accordance with Sustainable Development Goals, we have done all these activities. And we do have the related law, which is enacted. We have realized some voluntary review activities, and in accordance with the Resolution 5 and with its adoption on 30th of March, we have continued our work. And thank you very much. I'll be providing my written contribution to you later on.
We're really constrained by time. I now invite Morocco to take the floor, and it will be followed by United Arab Emirates, and then we will take the feedback comments from the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moderator. First, I would like to commend the IPU for talking about migration in this conference, which comes in an international context that has just emerged from COVID-19, in addition to the consequences of climate change. These issues that are on top of the international agendas, and all has direct impact and are co-related with the situation of migrants and refugees. In this context, the outputs of the first conference of the United Nations that was convened in last May in New York, which is talking about studying progress on this issue in an international framework, which is taken into consideration after the issuance of this compact 2018, which is impacting over 81 million people around the world. The first ministerial meeting was a pioneer in implementing these the issues of this compact. Was held in Rabat, for serving the migrants in source countries, countries in transport, and the countries of migration. And it also takes into consideration integrating promising policies in this framework. The King of Morocco, the guidelines of His Majesty the King, we have taken steps, and my country since 2018 has taken pioneering steps for migration and refugees towards refugees, especially refugees coming from African countries and Asian countries. This pioneering policy has settled the legal status of over 20,000 refugees. In addition, Morocco refuses to refute or to reject the legal migration at the cost of security measures. And we have shown in 2018 that countries cannot get rid of migration. Finally, as in our capacity as members of parliament, we are calling for a partnership between the governments in order to implement the outputs of the International Conference of Marrakesh on migration, and this is an event to review the achievements, review the status of refugees, and to make sure that they enjoy all the rights that are enshrined in the Marrakesh conference and all related consequences. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to United Arab Emirates.
In the name of God, Osama Ahmed Shafar, Member of the Parliament of the United Arab Emirates. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, peace be upon you all. In the beginning, I would like to seize the opportunity to speak on behalf of the National Parliament of the United Arab Emirates, extending my gratitude to the Parliament of Turkey and the IPU for hosting and inviting us to this important conference. Dear brothers and sisters, although 150 countries have signed and ratified this global compact on migration, and although there are international organizations that are defending the rights of migrants and refugees, however, we still need more efforts to improve practices and laws to have safe and secure measures. Dear ladies and gentlemen, the United Arab Emirates gives priority for the human rights of migrants in order to combat human trafficking and human smuggling, and we are taking a number of principles, on top of which, first, every member or every human being has the right to life and a dignified life. Number two, we have improved law regulations in a way that protects especially the legal entry to the countries, and defining the time period of staying in the country, as well as monitoring the regular and irregular migration in order to improve the economic situation of people. And the migration will continue as long as communities are unstable politically, economically, and socially. Based on that, all countries that are safe and stable will not be away from migration towards them. It can that is increasing by itself. The international communities is required to deal together in order to protect the regular migration based on the access to information and sharing information, building programs and for safe migration, and building a culture of tolerance amongst peoples and the cooperation between countries. Here I would like to mention that the amount of aid provided by the United Arab Emirates between 2010 and 2021 reached about that have been provided for the IDPs and the affected populations. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. you. Thank you very much. I turn now to the distinguished panelists for a few comments. Mr. Leclerc.
For these comments. I would like to highlight in particular the situation raised by the Pakistani delegation and parliamentary in view of the 40 years that Pakistan has been hosting such a large population of Afghans. I think the is the vehicle that this responsibility sharing mechanism so that and implementation so that a country like Pakistan for 40 years is assisted adequately to respond to the plight of the Afghans. At the same time, also in the country of origin, Afghanistan, currently the United Nations have to multiply its interventions so that Afghans are not left to die of hunger or of other issues. And it's extremely important that in the country of origin, a humanitarian approach is implemented to prevent first dying and movements of populations because of these difficulties. I would also like to respond to the comment made by the Iraqi parliamentarians regarding the specific issues of some refugees who have to flee and who have endured particular suffering, like the Yazidi population and the Yazidi women, as you mentioned. It is important that in each country hosting persons who have particularly suffered, that specific programs are implemented to immediately respond to the particular plight of women in particular who have suffered so much like the Yazidi women. And I would like to recommend that the support provided by several countries in responding quickly to the specific needs of women and children in particular is enhanced, and this can be done through your initiatives of parliamentarians. Juste un petit mot pour le parlementaire du Tchad que j'aimerais remercier car il montre à travers sa présentation qu'il est à la fois nécessaire d'avoir
I would like to thank the parliamentarian from the Chad. Yes, first of all, these laws have to be adopted and accepted, but also there is a need for some concrete steps. First of all, these people should be interviewed in their own spots, and then identifying their needs is essential.
Thank you very much. Yes, just to kind of express really my kind of appreciation. It's gratifying to hear that so many comments on the floor refer to the domestication of the GCM or related or other sort of other instruments which are compatible with the GCM. It is there, in some sense, a feeling that that we have stable states and then migration happens, which we all know is an illusion. Migration is absolutely part of the fabric of states, always has been. There's no state which is not touched by it. But I think there is a growing momentum around putting in place legislation or governance systems and instruments which do move towards, which are moving towards a well-managed migration system, which is both fair to migrants and supportive of the states and regions around them. Of course, this has been happening in many places for many years, but this idea of being able to manage and to successfully represent the interests of all parties in migration, I think is something which is evolving, and I hope that the GCM is part of that. And as I say, it's gratifying that when domesticating some of your legislation related to migration, it's very gratifying to hear that being mentioned. Some of the comments that were made about kind of relate to the uneven application, neighboring states, the feeling at times. It is, of course, a weakness of the GCM, or it's a feature of the Global Compact on Migration, that it is non-binding. It is voluntary thoroughly engaged in. There's some positive indications, though. We certainly would note that during the declaration of the migration declaration, sorry, the name's the compact progress report, that the language around this has actually kind of improved or hardened since the actual GCM in a world, in a time when multilateralism, of course, is kind of challenged on various different levels, and language around a lot of these global agreements is weakening. It's interesting, indicative, perhaps, that the language which is around about the declaration, the progress declaration, has become tougher. That states are looking to the Global Compact on Migration to be more assertive and forceful in the non-binding nature of the agreement. Also, the champion states, the numbers are increasing, 33. That's a very large number of states which have opted to be thought leaders and practice leaders, as I mentioned, Turkey being one of them. This is a bold statement about the nature, about the commitment of some states to ensuring a comprehensive implementation of the GCM. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Taran. If you would like to give us your input.
Thank you, and I thank the rich interventions we have just heard. And I have been listening carefully and discerned what I could see as perhaps 4 common points that are extremely crucial to the content of this conference. The first, amply raised by several delegations or several speakers, was the question of responsibility and responsibility sharing. And I think that we need to keep in mind because, again, we have already heard since the beginning of this morning the inequality, if I can put it in those terms, between the responsibility the countries neighboring conflict areas have to face, often with little support from other countries. And that leads me to a second point that I heard more implicitly than explicitly regarding responsibility sharing, and that is the question of asking the countries that provide plenty of resources to sell or give weapons to conflict situations or to intervene directly or indirectly militarily in conflict situations, to perhaps reallocate some of the resources that they are providing to warfare to instead provide peacemaking. And the third and related context to that, and we will discuss it more later, is the role that parliaments can play in that peacemaking. And I would suggest that for later discussion that we pick up on the concerns here, consider what roles parliaments can play in bilateral discussions across in regions to, in fact, work towards ceasefires and eventual peaceful and just solutions to the conflicts. And the last comment I wanted to make is I heard several references to laws and legal. And as the original convener of the Global Steering Committee for the Promotion of Ratification of the Migrants' Rights Conventions, I first want to salute Morocco, which was the second country in the world to ratify the International Convention on the Protection of Rights of all migrant workers and members of their families. And further to that, I would issue a national call, and I hope backed, I think, by the international number of resolutions at the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council, to those countries whose delegates spoke to take back to your parliaments consideration of ratifying that convention and other relevant instruments that we've spoken to. Thank you very much. I'll leave it at that.
Now we are moving to the last group of interventions. I invite now to the floor Iran, and it will be followed by Rwanda.
In the name of God, this is Nourouzi, representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Following the Afghan developments, 4.7 million refugees have been hosted by the Islamic Republic of Iran. are undocumented refugees. Even inside Afghanistan, they are undocumented, and there is no official figures and census for these people, but we are receiving them. Outbreaks of unrest and conflict in many parts of the world have led to the forced migration and displacement of a large population of women, men, and children, and at the same time have brought an increasing number of health and public welfare challenges. The phenomena of migration is the reality of today's international community, which is a source of political tensions and human tragedies. Some immigrants risk their lives to move to more developed countries where they also face abuse and suspicion. The Global Compact for safe and regular migration has a significant opportunity to improve the oversight on the situation of migration, address the challenges related to migration campaigns and movements, and strengthen immigrants' share in sustainable development of countries, and seek to strike a balance between the two social forces, that is the interest of national governments and the rights and interests of immigrants. In other words, the goal of the Global Compact is to create a appropriate situation for the optimal management of migration, which ensures minimum standards for migrants and facilitates international cooperation on challenges of migration. Meanwhile, it encourages member states to recognize fundamental rights of refugees and migrants, especially second-generation human rights, provide necessary conditions and facilities for their development and integration in the destination communities through making changes to their immigration policies. On the other hand, reduce migration rate by implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. Meanwhile, despite some shortcomings in these compact and other human rights instruments, the main problem for migrants, especially those with poor economic and social status, is not the lack of laws and regulations. Rather, the existing realities, including governmental policy making and their practical incapabilities to demand and realize rights, played a big role in this regard. Although today human rights as an ideal law arising out of notions of natural law has entered the realm of statute law, in many cases its implementation has faced problems due to the existence of realities as well as political and economic interests of governments and also some domestic parties and groups. However, we hope the passage of time and voluntary implementation of the Global Compact, we shall witness positive changes in the status of migrants and refugees throughout the world. Thank you very much for your attention.
Intervention, very short, if possible, under 1 minute. I now give the floor to Rwanda, and it will be followed by Pakistan.
Merci. Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Ms. Moderator. First of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to the organizers of this conference, and especially to the President of IPU and also to Mr. Speaker of Grand National Assembly of Türkiye for hosting us. Thank you very much. And I would like to also thank them for their opening remarks. So it's been 20 years now. In such a short period of time, Rwanda has become a destination country with 30,000 refugees, and it contributed to the reshaping country. Rwanda is country rather than being a country of origin. and people in search of safety and security. People searching are coming to our country. So for that reason, we have realized innovative policies to prevent humanitarian crises and to support development. We are trying to develop some new policies for refugees to contribute to economic development. And also, we do have some various interventions at national level. So we do create some policies and strategies at national level. Rwanda simultaneously is attaching importance to the dignity of refugees and the human rights of refugees. It is prioritizing these issues. I think in the other sessions, I will have the chance to have the floor again, and I can talk about what we are concretely doing in our country. Thank you very much once again.
Now I give the floor to Pakistan, and it will be followed by Algeria.
Thank you very much. This is with regard to the intervention of migration. Pakistan is one country, more than 10 million diaspora working basically throughout the world. They are all not living in sleep. They are the high-tech IT doctors, they are engineers, they are entrepreneurs, they are businessmen. And you can imagine that our labor force has worked so hard, they have sweat their blood in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, in Qatar, and many other countries where they have worked. And we are obliged that we were hosted with dignity and with affections. My question with regard to is that every country has causes of migration differently. Pakistan, a big population of more than 250 million people. 63% of our youth is in between 15 and 35. So I think the compact must address, considering each and every country like Pakistan, as to how we can help collaborate with those countries and make that particular burden lesser. So because SDG, we are trying our best to incorporate SDG and in our development program, which is only 7 more years left. And that is one of the root causes of migration, so we can provide at least the safety net, SAS program, and there are so many other programs that we have introduced and working very well. But at the same time, it is the part of the developing as to how they would help the underdeveloped country where the causes of migration are lying, as to how they can cooperate with them and make it easy for them so the legal migration can develop those. At the same time, it can benefit. Pakistan has been tremendously benefited. Diaspora spend about $33 billion every year in Pakistan, and we basically oblige to them. So again, interventions with regard to as to how international forum and a member of United Nations can help those countries and minimize the causes of migration. Thank you.
Thank you. I will invite now Algeria to take the floor, and it will be followed by our host country, Turkey.
First, allow me on my own behalf and on behalf of the members of the National Assembly of the People in Algeria to extend our thanks and gratitude to the IPU and the Grand National Assembly of Turkey for organizing this conference. I would like to communicate to the Speaker of the Algerian Parliament, all members and speakers of the Parliament's members of the IPU, especially the Parliament of Turkey, wishing more success and security. Dear audience, ladies and gentlemen, first, at the outset of my participation, I would like to start with a verse from the Holy Quran that is related to this issue. Allah the Almighty says in the Holy Quran, we have dignified the mankind, and we have brought them through roads and sea in order to meet each other, and we have preferred them to other creatures. There are several topics that are related to migration, but the most beautiful thing is trying to domesticate these issues in our domestic legislations and laws, and trying to implement those principles, find mechanisms that can be implemented in reality and not only in theory. In our own countries, as well as respecting the obligations in those compacts in order and not keep them just ink on paper or just in the drawers of our offices. As for my country, Algeria has always been committed, based on the instructions of the President Abdelmajid Tebboune on the issue of migration as a moral and a human obligation, and we have given that a priority, and we have ratified relevant compacts, agreements, and we have shown and solidarity work in order to provide towards issues, including climate change, migration, and other issues. And we have addressed the issues of the source countries, countries in transport, and the destination countries all together. And we have also ratified the Convention on the Protection of Working Migrants and their families. And we are trying to find solutions to all the challenges that we are facing with other countries in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, Algeria have received thousands of migrants, and they provided them with the respectable level of residence and integration, despite the that we had, and we have provided the integrity and dignity for all people, along with providing legal status and the necessary practical mechanisms in order to face the irregular migration, because migration is a phenomenon in Africa that we are facing, including Algeria, and this requires us to share the burden of this international responsibility. In this context, we need to show solidarity, but this doesn't put us aside from exploiting the legislations of any country, especially that migration is related to terrorism, organized crime, and conflict and violence in these countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. My name is Ravza Kavakçıkan, the Turkish delegation to the Inter-Parliamentary Union. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome all of you to Turkey. We're honored and happy to host you, and we hope that our meeting will be a very fruitful. I wanted to ask to reply in relation to the statement made by the Iraqi representative. The second representative speaking from Iraq made a statement, and I would like to say that it doesn't reflect the truth. Turkey continues against terrorism within its borders and outside its borders. We're fighting against PKK terrorism. We're fighting against Daesh terrorism. We're fighting against YPG, PYD terrorism within our borders and outside of our borders, within the international law. And this fight against terrorism, sometimes Turkey feels like it has to face most of the burden, especially in the situation with fighting against Daesh. So among the people that we're hosting, more than 4 million people that we're hosting, there's also a Yazidi population that we're hosting, and we're more than happy to host. I wanted to make this statement and complete this presentation. When we're fighting against terrorism, we're taking extreme caution so that not a single civilian life is lost. And we have all our UAV recordings as a reflection of that. So this lies and propaganda don't have any basis, any truth, because while we're fighting against terrorism, we want to make sure that not a single young child or a woman or someone young or any other human being loses their lives again because of the terrorists. I just wanted to thank you and hope that our meeting will be a very fruitful one. Welcome again.
Thank you. I turn now to our distinguished panelists for the last comments and remarks. Mr. Leclerc, would you like to start?
For the additional comments, and I would like also to salute the hospitality that the Islamic Republic of Iran has, as the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, conveyed to many Afghans during 40 years. And I would like to comment that it's a combination of legal measures and social inclusion programs which is required, not either or, but indeed the legal requirements and the social inclusion policies be implemented. Je voudrais également répondre et remercier le délégué du Parlement, la parlementaire du Rwanda.
I also would like to thank the Republic of Rwanda, because Rwanda is tremendously working for the well-being of migrants. And in Libya, for example, some groups of people have suffered a lot, but with the initiatives of Rwanda and Nigeria, these people can live safely. I would like to talk about another initiative started by the UK. Has an agreement with Rwanda, and for asylum seekers, this is within the scope of joint responsibility, actually. What UK is doing is actually giving responsibility to another country, so we hope that this policy will stop.
Those on the floor who mentioned the internalization, the domestication of best practices legislatively around about migration, it is, of course, gratifying to hear. Just to pick up on the comment about from a colleague from Pakistan discussing the diaspora issues, just to kind of emphasize, of course, that the Global Compact about migration is not about preventing migration. It is, of course, supporting positive forms of migration, and which, of course, I know you are aware of and meant. But just to say that development doesn't per se prevent migration. In fact, improving development indicators, normally there's a period where migration increases, because migration is something which also provides opportunity, and engagement with diaspora is a very, very good example of this. Being able to successfully manage and integrate diasporas into the national economy, use those resources, both financial expertise, is one of a great can be a great boost to the development of an economy. And indeed, some countries have really have integrated the role of diaspora into a very, very major parts of their economy, and forming a considerable and very purposeful percentage of GDP. But But thank you for mentioning that. I know that Pakistan has a very long historical relationship of migration with Turkey, and it was interesting intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And last but not least, please, Mr. Taran.
Thank you. I first want to simply commend the majority of countries represented by speakers in this last round as countries that have ratified the International Convention on the Protection of Rights of all Migrant Workers and members of their countries. Algeria acknowledged it. We should note that Rwanda has so done. And of course, I already referred earlier to Turkey being, I think, the third country to have ratified it historically. I want to pick up on something one of the speakers didn't said to move us in the direction of solutions. And I want to, in a sense, commend the leadership of Rwanda in the African context for having led the initiative to establish a free movement protocol for the entire region of the continent of Africa under the auspices of the African Union. Now 54 states, at least theoretically, when they ratify the protocol, will have a mechanism unique in the world to allow for movement with dignity and in response to the imperative of regional integration as the means for economic sustainability for many countries in many regions worldwide. And moving from that and talking about, I think, the concern raised by the speaker from Pakistan around development and collaboration, I would just note a couple of things. One, I think we need to look at promoting the notion of jobs-rich development and jobs-rich investment. And a very interesting relationship between migration, non-migration, and investment and development is the fact that China, which is facing significant decline in its workforce, has been increasingly investing in moving labor-intensive production of goods to countries like Vietnam and others that have large populations with a reasonable level of training and education. And it's something that other countries may want to consider, and of course the countries receiving investments, making sure that the treatment of people in the firms or manufacturing that are set up are decent work conditions. But I'd also want to remind us of the contribution migrants make to development in the countries where they work. And I'll simply give you a couple of figures. You've probably seen the figure that last year about 700 billion US dollars equivalent were sent home by migrants as remittances. But the UN and FAO acknowledge, I should say IFAD, acknowledge that that only represents about 15% of their earnings, which means that 85% of their earnings and what they're contributing to the economies of the countries they're working in goes back into the economies of those countries. And that figure is approximately 5 trillion, not billion, but trillion dollars per year. And the amount in economic terms of migrant contributions to the economies of the countries where they work globally is a value higher than the total value of international trade in petroleum, gas, and derivatives, just to say how important migration has become for the world economy. I will say a little bit more in the next session on the imperative now and the fact that countries around the world, particularly developed countries, are suffering, and inflation is one of the products of the lack of flexibility and the restrictions placed on migrations, rather than making it easier for people to get to where the jobs are and where their skills and labor is needed. But I think that's enough for this session, and I think some ideas to move us forward.
Thank you very much. We arrive at the end of this session. I want to thank to the distinguished Speaker of the Parliament, our panelists, to all of you members of parliaments and head of delegation for participating and contributing to this session. I wish you very productive sessions ahead at the conference for today and tomorrow. Thank you.